A very grim assessment when it comes to UK's energy bills and in turn its economy. Energy bills to rise by over 50% in the month of April based on the regulator in the UK, which has announced price hikes. An estimated 22 million households will see their energy costs increase. Can these households afford that in the age of COVID? In this edition of the Spotlight, we will look at why rising energy costs are not the only problems plaguing UK's economy, an economy which has not been able to adapt itself since Brexit. Let's get the latest on this. Rob Carter is our correspondent joining us from London. Rob, at this point, looking at this increase of 50%, it's quite incredible. It is set to start in the month of April, but I was under the assumption that the energy costs have risen already. And of course, tell us what the government intends to do, because I think they do have I guess, a quick fix for this in a sense.
Well, energy costs are just one aspect which people are concerned about here in the UK. The price of living in general is on the increase. You'll remember from past reporting that petrol prices are at least 4 times higher than they were the same time last year. There's also inflation taking place. People are having to pay more in order to get their day-to-day food groceries, among many other things. And this energy bill crisis is just the latest in a long line of increased living costs which are plaguing the country. It's reached a point now where people are very concerned about whether or not they can even pay off their mortgages, meaning that many people going forward may be in a position where they're going to have to choose between either eating a meal, paying their mortgage, or putting the heating on during the cold months. So the situation here is very concerning for the majority of people. The government, of course, is still chewing over what plans it's going to take in order to reduce this in the future, but it's the chancellor and also the Bank of England have been very, very clear that going forward in the immediate terms, things are going to get hard for people, and the government is in no position to deny the fact that people are going to have to pay more, including an increase on immediate bills, including national insurance and things like that. Of course, there are other things which are coming into play over the next few months. Protest movements such as Insulate Britain, which have been long campaigning through direct action to try and force the government to insulate homes, to save people money on their bills and to keep people warm during the cold months. They've announced that they will return to their radical direct action plan going forward, and they intend to be more ambitious than they were last year. And this is the group which, of course, was shutting down motorways, causing major disruption across the UK, and has a very controversial legacy in itself, putting the government in more difficult waters as to dealing with this crisis. So obviously going forward, things are likely to get harder rather than better. The question is, what will the government do in order to try and decrease the amount of money that people are spending? And could they win the next general election if prices and bills and taxes remain so high?
Rob Carter, thank you very much for that. We appreciate it. Okay, let me introduce our guest for this edition of the Spotlight. We have historian and investigative journalist Tony Gosselin joining us from Bristol. Also joining us, journalist and political commentator Said Mohsen Abbas, who joins us from London. So we have all UK cast here. That's great in this sense. Tony Gosselin, let me start with you. We heard our correspondent there. I'm curious about this rise in energy, in particular, I guess, when it comes to households and gas, set to increase by 50% based on the stat I'm looking at here. What's interesting here is that Britain's energy regulator can cap the price, but it couldn't do it beyond the 50% rise. It couldn't cap it or bring down the price or lower it. Is that because the energy companies are privatized and therefore they can't set the price, and that's the best that it could do at this point, the energy regulator?
Well, in a way, you've put your finger on the main problem here, and that is that although they are supposed to be able to regulate the energy market, they can't regulate the energy market, because if all of the energy companies get together and hike up the price of gas, as they have done. There's much more gas, American gas, going to China at the moment. And as Putin pointed out a couple of months ago, this is the main reason why these energy prices in Europe are going up, because they can't get as much easy, cheap gas as they were doing from the United States. And the fact that this sort of thing is left to the vagaries of a market actually has enabled these energy companies to make vast profits. What we've seen just literally last week announced by Shell, a 14-fold increase, 14 times more profits and money going to their shareholders through share dividends than the previous quarter. So a massive amount of money is being made by these privatized energy companies. What, of course, should happen is that these industries, because they are misbehaving, profiteering off the backs of ordinary working people in Britain, they should be simply renationalised. They should be requisitioned by the government, and then they can start to actually charge the cost price, which is what these utilities should be charging for the energy that people are using. It was interesting. I was just looking at when it was all privatized. This is the gas and also BP, the golden share in petroleum that was privatized in the Thatcher years. It was NM Rothschild and Sons that managed that privatization. These are very powerful investment bankers, and you have to ask, who's in charge? We ask this all the time with Boris. Who's really running the show? And I think it shows you that the City of London has actually got far more power than the politicians that we elect, when they can be involved in lobbying and arranging for these industries, which we all need, part of our national assets under the ground, to be sold off to private interests. Then also, I would say, we had a couple of months ago fuel shortages orchestrated during the party conference season by the petrol companies here in Britain. So queues outside petrol stations. There was no real fuel shortage. They were doing this deliberately to push the prices up, make more profits, as they've just announced they may, and also to show the world and show the country and show the politicians who's in charge. That is to say that these massive energy conglomerates backed by the City of London are far more powerful than our politicians, I'm afraid.
That's another angle to this, which is very interesting. We're going to get into that. But Mohsen Abbas, taking a look at what is happening to the UK, starting with the topic at hand, which was the energy hike in prices. There's a vast array there's so many things that are going wrong for the UK, but this particular one hits UK households pretty hard. 22 million British households are connected to the country's gas grid. Can you give us your assessment of how vast the problem this is?
Well, I think on the ground, it's a huge problem, because, you know, those at the poverty-stricken end, and there's substantial numbers of those in Britain, are going to feel the pinch immediately, because when you're talking about this scale of hike in prices, of course, people are going to then have to make choices, and the kind of choices they're making are, do I keep my heating on, or do I eat food? I mean, these are literally the decisions that many, say, pensioners or people who are unemployed, or people who have been, you know, down and out for a while on their luck, are having to make. And this is a situation that was entirely avoidable because, you know, of course, we've had the debacle of Brexit, which was a premeditated self-annihilation exercise that Boris was personally very much involved in creating. We've had the supposed Omicron virus, preceded by the Delta, preceded by COVID, whatever else it was in its very initiation, which has been a sort of a litany of you know, impending economic disasters that was being built up over that time. So it's hardly a surprise as to what's happening now. Most of us who are in the know have been saying this is exactly what's going to happen, but you can't blame it all on the virus, etc. This is a kind of gross mismanagement on the part of the government. They've underestimated the Brexit scenario quite deliberately, I'd rather suspect.
Sure.
They've underestimated the COVID aspect quite deliberately as well.
Okay, well, I saw you nodding there, Tony Gosling, except when Mohsen Abbas started talking about Brexit, then you stopped. I'm wondering why. But tell us about Brexit and promises that Boris Johnson made. He was supposed to cut the VAT on fuel bills, and he has decided not to do that. So, which is said to give this rise, or be one of the factors for this rise by 54%. Why didn't Prime Minister Johnson follow through with his promise?
Well, of course, it's because Johnson is not necessarily in charge. He has to take advice of the city and his very powerful chancellor, the billionaire Rishi Sunak, the guy from Goldman Sachs. So there are all sorts of people around who've got also a very big say in what goes on. Boris he's being pulled. He's like a tug of war. He's being pulled in various different directions. Sometimes one lobby wins, another time another lobby wins. But I don't think he's a man of specific principles. He's the sort of politician who will try and go with the flow. Whichever way it seems he's going to manage to survive, he will go that way. And so when he's being pulled in this, I mean, it's absolutely right what you're saying about the horrific conditions here in Britain for ordinary people. It's been getting worse really since the 1970s. Slowly but surely, people's living standards have been eroded. Job opportunities are getting worse and worse. The unions are able less and less to keep people's wages at a reasonable level. There's increasing unemployment. There's now the expectation that both the man and the woman in a household must go to work in order to afford to pay to buy their own home and to make sure kids go to nursery and this sort of thing. So there's massive increases on the finances. But if you look at the structural changes that have been going on, and this is the latest, this really does take the biscuit. I mean, what we've been seeing has gradually been happening over the years. But these fuel increases are a massive increase in that. It's almost an exponential rise. It's because the economy has shifted from a manufacturing and service economy into a financial economy. And what those financialized infrastructure is all the basic things we need, things like housing, water, all the basics. Those is where there's big investment,
but that's been going on for a while.
To make profit out of those.
But that's been going on for a while, if I'm correct to say that, Tony Gosling, in terms of the UK turning out to become this financial focused economy where the money is made as opposed to what it used to have, which was a lot of manufacturing jobs. But I got to ask this next question from you, Said Mohsin Abbas, because it's very perplexing reading how thousands die because they can't afford heating bills in the UK. More than 2,700 people to have died each year in England and in Wales because they can't afford to keep their homes warm. And then what was more interesting was this is back in 2011. So I'm guessing that figure is higher now. Tell us how this happens and why it seems like the UK government either doesn't care or has learned to adapt to this grim fatality rate as a result, and how much worse it can get with this 54% rise in gas prices or energy prices.
Well, what they've done in Britain since neoliberalism has taken hold of this country in a full way, post-Thatcher. Margaret Thatcher was the one who ushered it all in back in the 80s. And since then, what we've seen is the delusion of the British, what I still call the working class. Because what they were conned into believing was that they'd somehow become middle class and that they were sort of part of a gravy train which could go and buy their own houses. They could go on several holidays a year. They could expect to spend what they liked in restaurants, go out and have sort of those kind of perks, which I guess people would regard as normal activities now. But of course, for the last 20 years, we've seen that wages haven't been increased, not of the average person. They might have for parliamentarians and others, but for the average person, in real terms, wages haven't gone up. Contrast that with food prices and general cost of living, that's gone up considerably. So you can see that inflation, British households naturally are being hit by inflation, and it's the highest rate of inflation for a decade, as far as I can work out from the research I've done. And of course, that hasn't been arrested by the government. In fact, they've just been printing more money and throwing it at the problem. Now, the thing is, printing money is a habit which has been given to them by the money lenders. And I think Tony was quite right in pointing out to the real problem that Britain has, is that they bought into this idea that you can basically carry on printing printing money your way out of the problems. Well, sooner or later, any economist knows that is not going to be the reality of the the solution. And until, for instance, a government stops this, and until they invest in real infrastructure, get energy resources. For instance, in this country, why on earth has no government invested in tidal energy? We're surrounded by waves in this little island, and we can produce. I think we produce something like 10% of our natural energy resources a year from tidal waves, etc., and the coast. But we haven't invested in it. We still rely on the carbon.
Well, that may be part of the green. That could be part of the green movement that or actions that is under that umbrella. Maybe I don't have information on that. But you talked about printing money, and of course that's a perfect recipe, Tony Gosling, for inflation, which the UK is experiencing. It's now a 30-year high. One source indicating it's up to about 7%. But is it? I mean, when we hear that, then I'm about to ask you. But haven't prices gone up a lot more? I talked to a correspondent just days ago, and he said price of margarine has quadrupled. I'm wondering what everyday items, how much prices have increased. Something that comes at the top of your mind, which then translates to the poor and how they can't afford the amount of price increases that's occurring.
Okay, so I think that actually inflation is not being driven by the quantitative easing, the printing of money, because that's been going on for since really at least 2008. The massive bailouts of the banks that took place then. But the reason is because mainly around, I think, energy prices going up, because that has a knock-on effect on everybody. So the food producers have to pay more, so the prices start to go up in the shops. That's, I think, what's causing this inflation. And I would say what we've seen over the last year or so, somewhere between 5 and 10% inflation in basic food prices, the sort of things that people need to survive. That, I think, is been the main driver of the prices going up. But I think there is a bigger problem, and that is this green agenda. We've seen, there's very good aims of the Greens, but we've seen these added extra taxes onto fuel going on because of this. And also, as Mohsin said there, the failure to invest in really good, reliable, cheap green energy like tidal energy. I live in Bristol, which has got one of the highest tidal reaches in the world, along with Newfoundland. And we could very easily have a tidal energy system here. They blocked it time and time and time again. And that's because there's not enough profits in it. There's more profits in the fossil fuel industries. And also, there's a whole gravy train developed around other types of green, so-called green energy. So the green thing has been actually a major problem. For example, finding that the electricity grid in Britain can hardly deliver its energy, and we have to switch on the one coal-fired power station we've still got left in order to keep energy going. So that has also been subsidised.
Sure.
All this green stuff has been subsidised, which has also pushed energy prices up. Remember Henry Kissinger? He said, this is a good few years, probably 30 years ago now, he said, you control the energy, you control the nations. And these energy companies are very powerful, and they work together in concert around the Western world, as you probably know. The other thing he said, by the way, was control the food and you control the people. And so by putting food prices up, make it more difficult to get hold of food, people are being driven further into debt and into a form of wage slavery.
Right. Well, I'd like to capitalize on what you said in the beginning of the program, Tony Gosling. I think you mentioned it there a little bit also. And say, Mohsin Abbas, that was when Tony Gosling talked about Shell. Now, Shell has posted its highest quarterly profits in 8 years. That's a lot. But more alarming is that there wasn't a gas shortage or a petrol shortage. They were just keeping it to drive the prices higher. That is something that is plaguing a lot of different commodities or items, I should say, especially, for example, in the U.S. And I'm wondering if the UK is the same case, where because of COVID, people did not go out as much, did not purchase as much maybe, and now it's time to make the money, to make back the profits by increasing the prices even higher, which means that prices are not going to come down. Is that a correct way of looking at it, which means basically corporate greed is playing into the picture?
Very much so. And I think let's take it a step up now, because Vanguard and BlackRock, according to my research, are two companies who basically overarch most of the financial capital and the corporations of the world. Now, if we're living in the alternate reality where I'm meant to believe that there's free competition, free trade, and there's real corporations out there which are all fighting each other, then I could accept that, okay, there's a dog eat dog world out there. But I've increasingly started studying people like Professor Rodney Shakespeare and his take on binary economics and the solutions, and researching things like, for instance, the Bradbury pound, which was something which Britain used as a way of kicking out the corporates, looking back at the way America once dealt with bankers as well. There is a precedent for solving these problems. And the precedent begins, first of all, with I think, stopping the reliance on the guys who create the main debt, who use usury and use the interest mechanisms and the money system as a way of making all these things happen. And of course, energy companies and all these different corporates that fix the prices and sort of sit behind closed doors and decide what's going to happen, what's not going to happen. Then they come into play. But behind it, let's take it another stage further back and look at the World Economic Forum, for example. Mr. Klaus Schwab, who has been harping on about the Agenda 2030 and the Great Reset, the global reset. And all of this involves the biggest transnational corporations in the world, whether there's 2 of them or dozens of them or whatever you believe. And it involves the state operators. These are clear-cut strategies and policies which hinge around...
I wonder if there was a bidding for that. It makes me wonder if there was a bidding for that to become part of this, as you said, great 2030 reset.
Well, yes. I mean, the thing is, if you believe in accidents and chaos in the economic world, then of course you just see things as a matter of symptoms and consequence and reactionary behavior. But if you start seeing that actually there are players that have power to be able to influence those the economics, i.e., they control the means of production, they control the raw materials, they can create wars where they want, they can release viruses if they wanted to create chaos around the world, and they can also create propaganda and create corporate.
I got to jump in. Unfortunately, we're just running out of time, Semoson Abbas. I do apologize. And I figured I'm going to save this one for last, Tony Gosling. And this is what Rishi Sunak has said. The government does have a plan to help out, I guess, with the energy bills for average UK. But then he said in terms of taxes, he said his mission was to cut taxes ahead of the next general election, scheduled for May 2024. Well, that's 2 years from now. How's that going to help people now?
Well, you know what? Today, Rishi Sunak has just blocked a recovery plan for the National Health Service too. I think if I was Boris Johnson, I would sack him today, because he's clearly showing policies which are simply there to beef up the profits of the biggest companies in the City of London. For example, Shell, their 14-fold rise in profits at the same time as the energy prices are going up, for consumers 50%.
Thank you for that. I'm sorry, Tony Gosling. We're just out of time. I do apologize. Thank you so much. It was very riveting. This was great. Tony Gosling there, senior investigative journalist from Bristol. Thank you so much for your contribution. And Semoson Abbas from London, thank you. Journalist and political commentator, also from London there. And that does it for this edition of The Spotlight. From me, Kaveh Taghway. It's goodbye until next time.